Have you ever felt that the world around you has too much power over you? That a word, a glance, or an external situation can snatch away your peace and shake your inner balance? The truth is that most people live trapped in a constant state of reaction, dominated by emotions that seem impossible to control. But what if I told you there is a secret, a profound and transformative knowledge that can free you from that emotional prison? A secret that great thinkers have studied for centuries, but few truly understand in its essence. Today, in this video, I will reveal that secret. Let's dive into the philosophy of Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, and discover how his teachings can help you reach such an inner strength that nothing and no one will ever affect you again. By the time you finish watching this video, you will have a clear map to understand yourself on a deep level, master your emotions, and become an unbreakable person. You will learn how your inner shadow can be the key to your liberation, how to transcend the judgments and expectations of others, and how to live from absolute authenticity. Get ready, because this is not just theory. Here, we will do introspective exercises that will challenge your perception of reality and give you practical tools to transform your life starting today. Stay until the end, because this could change your life. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is one of the most powerful phrases in deep psychology, because it reveals a shocking truth. Many of the things that affect us in life do not come from the outside world, but from within ourselves. What bothers us is not so much what others do or say, but the parts of ourselves that we haven't understood or integrated. What annoys us in others, what hurts us, what offends us, is nothing more than a reflection of something inside us that we have not healed. And here is where Jung's most revolutionary concept comes into play. The shadow. What is the shadow, and why does it shape our lives? Jung defined the shadow as the set of all those aspects of our personality that we have repressed, denied, or rejected. These are parts of ourselves that society, family, and education taught us to consider unacceptable. For example, if in your childhood you were taught that anger is bad, it is likely that you repressed your aggressiveness, and as a result, now you are an extremely compliant person, unable to set boundaries. But that repressed anger does not disappear. It hides in the subconscious and manifests in unexpected ways. Anxiety, frustration, psychosomatic illnesses, toxic relationships. And most importantly, everything you deny about yourself, you project onto others. This means that when someone irritates you, hurts you, or unsettles you, it is not really that person who holds power over you. It is you who is reacting to something you carry inside. Introspective exercise. Confronting your shadow. To make this learning real and not just theoretical, I want you to do this exercise right now. Think of someone who deeply annoys you. It could be a person who hurt you, someone you can't stand, or a figure that simply irritates you. Make a list of the traits that bother you the most about that person. Are they arrogant, selfish, manipulative? Now honestly ask yourself, is there something like that in me? At what moments in my life do I act similarly, even if on a small scale? Write down what you discover and reflect. Instead of rejecting those aspects, how could you integrate them healthily into your life? What you have just done is the first step toward individuation, the process Jung described as the true transformation of the self. Liberation lies in acceptance. Jung teaches us that we cannot be free until we integrate our shadow. As long as we keep rejecting parts of ourselves, the outside world will continue to have power over our emotions. That's why the key for nothing and no one to affect you is not controlling others or running from difficult situations, but understanding yourself on a deep level and making peace with all parts of your being. Now I want you to participate in the comments. If this video has made you reflect, Write in the comments, "I embrace my shadow and take control of my destiny." Leave it in the comments and keep watching, because now we will dive even deeper into how Jung helps us free ourselves from fear and suffering. If you have come this far, you already understand that the key for nothing and no one to affect you lies in the integration of the shadow. But Jung doesn't stop there. He tells us that our existence is not only about accepting our darkness, but about discovering who we truly are behind all our masks. Jung spoke of the self, the true core of our identity. While we remain trapped in the duality of the persona, the mask we show the world, and the shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves, we drift away from the self, our authentic being. But there is something that prevents us from reaching it: the ego. The ego is a barrier to peace of mind. The ego is nothing more than the image we have constructed of ourselves, the internal voice that says, "I am like this. This is what I'm worth. This is what I deserve." But in reality, the ego is a construction based on past experiences, fears, and conditioning. Jung warns us, the bigger the ego, the more fragile the person becomes. This is something we have all experienced. Have you noticed that the most egocentric people are often the most sensitive to criticism? Those who need validation the most are the ones who suffer the most when they don't get it. The ego makes us vulnerable. It ties us to an image of ourselves that we must protect at all costs. And the moment someone challenges it, we feel personally attacked. But here is the great revelation. If you manage to transcend your ego, nothing and no one will ever be able to affect you. Introspective exercise. Challenging your ego. Let's do an exercise that will help you see how strong your ego is and how easily the outside world can shake you emotionally. Remember the last time you felt offended, criticized, ignored, or belittled? Ask yourself, what part of your identity felt threatened? Was it your intelligence, your attractiveness, your value as a person? Now imagine that aspect of you disappearing. Would you still be yourself, or would losing it mean the end of your identity? Write a sincere answer. If you knew you had nothing to prove to anyone, what would change? What you are doing here is observing your ego from an external perspective. The moment you realize you don't need to defend an image, the power others have over you dissolves. This is the concept of projection, when others act as our mirror. Jung also taught us that when something deeply irritates us in someone else, it's actually a reflection of something within ourselves. This is what he called psychological projection. For example, if someone seems arrogant to you and it bothers you, maybe it's because you also have some repressed arrogance, or, on some level, you wish you were more confident. What we reject in others reveals parts of ourselves we don't want to see. Think about this. How many times have you been bothered by seeing someone do something you secretly wish you could do, but don't dare to? This is another big step toward freeing yourself from how others make you feel. Every time someone triggers a strong emotional reaction in you, ask yourself, what is this person showing me about myself? If you apply this principle in your life, you will stop taking things personally and start using these moments as tools for self-knowledge. The influence of Freud and other psychologists. Although Jung distanced himself from Freud, they both shared the idea that much of our suffering comes from the subconscious. Freud talked about the I, that primitive and chaotic part of our mind where our most repressed desires reside. Combining Jung's and Freud's theories, we see a clear pattern. The ego keeps us trapped in the image we want to project. The shadow contains everything we have repressed about ourselves, and the id is the deepest part of our being where our most primal impulses live. The path to true freedom is to integrate all these parts and stop running away from ourselves. Introspective exercise, connecting with your true self. Now do this exercise. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Ask yourself, if the world couldn't judge me, who would I really be? Write down the first thing that comes to your mind without overthinking it. Reflect on how much of that authentic version of yourself you show the world. This exercise will help you realize how much of your life is dictated by fear of judgment from others. The power of individuation, the path to true freedom. Jung called individuation the process of integrating all our parts, ego, shadow, persona, and self, into a single authentic being. Individuation doesn't mean becoming perfect or eliminating your flaws. It means becoming whole, accepting every part of yourself without rejection. When you achieve this, something wonderful happens. The world loses power over you. If someone criticizes you, you no longer react with anger because you know who you are. If someone tries to manipulate you, you don't fall into their game because you don't need their validation. If life hits you with a crisis, you face it calmly because you trust yourself. That is true peace of mind. Now I want you to participate in the comments. If this video made you reflect, leave the phrase, "Nothing external can steal my inner peace," in the comments. Leave it there and get ready, because now we are going to dive into a powerful story that shows how these teachings come alive in reality. Samuel's story. Samuel had never questioned his identity. He saw himself as a normal, hardworking, responsible man, someone who simply did what was expected. But deep inside, something had always felt out of place. Something inside him made him feel empty, as if his life were a continuous performance, a role he played for others. Everything changed the day his life started to fall apart. First, it was his job. He had worked at the same company for years, believing his dedication would guarantee stability. But one Friday afternoon, his boss called him into the office and coldly told him he was no longer needed. No explanations, no kind words, just a dry dismissal. Samuel left the building with a knot in his stomach. How could it be so easy for them to discard him? He had sacrificed years of his time and energy for that company, and now he was being treated like a worthless object. As he walked to his car, he checked his phone. There were several messages from his girlfriend, but none brought comfort. The last one read, "I don't know how to say this, but I need time. I don't really know who you are, and I feel you've never been completely honest with me, or even with yourself." Samuel felt the air leave his chest. It couldn't be a coincidence, all on the same day. His mind searched for culprits. His boss was a jerk. His girlfriend was ungrateful. The world was unfair. But while driving home, something inside him felt strangely quiet. There was no anger or despair, just a deep silence he couldn't explain. That night, unable to sleep, he went out for a walk without a destination. He found himself wandering deserted streets until his steps took him to a small second-hand bookstore. The place had a mysterious air, as if it had been waiting for him. He entered without much thought and started browsing the shelves until a book caught his eye. Man and His Symbols by Jung. He had never heard of Jung before, but as he skimmed the first pages, something in Jung's words struck him deeply. Until the unconscious is made conscious, the subconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Samuel slammed the book shut and felt a chill run down his spine. What if everything happening to him wasn't just bad luck? What if, instead of being a victim, something inside him had led him to this moment? He bought the book and went home with the feeling that he was about to discover something important. He spent the whole night reading. Jung spoke of the shadow, that hidden part of personality containing everything we have repressed, fears, insecurities, forbidden desires. The more Samuel read, the more he understood. He had always despised arrogant people, those who seemed effortlessly confident. But now Jung gave him a disturbing answer. What bothers us most about others is a reflection of what we repress in ourselves. Samuel felt a punch in his stomach. Could it be that his anger toward others was just a reflection of his own insecurity? He decided to test the theory. He grabbed a notebook and started writing down. Samuel listed the names of the people who had irritated him the most in his life, and next to each name, he described exactly what annoyed him about them. When he finished, he stopped to read his list. Arrogant, inconsiderate, fake, cold. He closed his eyes and wondered, what if he himself was like that? What if deep down he had always wanted to be more confident, more independent, stronger, but had repressed that desire because he was taught it was wrong to be that way? Suddenly, everything made sense. His girlfriend had been right. He had never been honest with himself. That night, Samuel had a strange dream. He saw himself in a dark room, and on the other side of the room, an identical figure watched him silently. It didn't speak or move, just stared with an expression he couldn't interpret. When he woke up, he felt the dream held a message. Something inside him was trying to surface, and he was ready to face whatever he found. Samuel woke up tense. The image of his double in the dark room was still vivid in his mind. It wasn't just a dream. There was something in that figure, something that knew him better than he knew himself. As he got up and prepared coffee, he tried to shake off the lingering unease from the night before. He looked at the notebook with his notes. There were his own words, his confession in his own handwriting. He realized something. He had spent his whole life avoiding looking at himself in the mirror of his own mind. He had grown up trying to be the perfect son, the reliable friend, the exemplary employee. Every time he felt anger, jealousy, or resentment, he repressed those feelings, telling himself he wasn't that kind of person, that he was good. But now he understood what Jung explained. What is not made conscious manifests in our life as destiny. Samuel had always felt like a victim of circumstances, as if life was against him. But what if everything that had happened to him was the result of his own denial? He sighed, picked up his notebook again, and decided to run an experiment. He opened a blank page and wrote a question. What am I most afraid to admit about myself? He didn't overthink it. He let his hand write without filters. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being seen as weak. I'm afraid I'm not enough. When he finished, he stared at the page, feeling the weight of those words. It was the first time in his life he admitted them. Samuel spent the day in an unusual calm, not joy, but not sadness either. It was as if, for the first time, he had stopped running away from himself. That afternoon, as he walked through the city, he remembered something he had read in Jung's book. What you resist persists. His whole life he had resisted his fears, insecurities, and anger. But now, by writing and acknowledging them, he felt, for the first time in years, that he was in control. When he got home, he made a decision. He looked at himself in the mirror and aloud spoke each of the phrases he had written. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being seen as weak. I'm afraid I'm not enough. Each word hit him like a punch to the stomach, but was also a release. At that moment, a sensation ran through his skin. The figure from his dream appeared in his mind. But this time, he didn't see it as a threat. It was him, his shadow, the part of himself he had ignored for so long. That night, the dream returned. He was in the same dark room, but now the figure didn't just look at him. It spoke with his own voice. Now you see me. Samuel felt a chill, but no fear. He woke up feeling like he had crossed an invisible door. Something inside him had changed. The next morning, instead of checking his phone or distracting himself, he went out for a walk with no fixed direction. As he walked, he recalled another teaching from Jung. One doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. If his shadow had always been there, it was time to get to know it better. He decided to try a new exercise. He wrote in his notebook, "Dear Shadow, what have you been trying to tell me all this time?" and began writing the first thoughts that came to mind, as if allowing that part of him to speak. "I've always been here, waiting for you to see me. I'm not your enemy. I just want you to accept me. I've made you react with anger so you would notice me. I've influenced your decisions so you would listen." Samuel shivered as he read what he had written. For the first time, he understood that his shadow wasn't a monster or something to destroy. It was a part of him that just wanted to be seen. He breathed deeply. For the first time in his life, he was not running away from himself. And that was the beginning of his true transformation. Samuel woke with a strange feeling, as if something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer the same man who, days ago, lived in excuses and blame. Now he understood something fundamental. His shadow was not his enemy, but his ally. He spent the morning reviewing the notes in his notebook. Every sentence felt like an undeniable truth. There was no turning back. He had opened a door within himself, and now he had to fully walk through it. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and remembered the dream from the previous night. The figure watching him in the darkness. He no longer felt fear. In fact, for the first time, he felt curiosity. He decided to do something different. Instead of ignoring his emotions, he wanted to face them. He sat at his desk and began writing a letter, not to a real person, but to his shadow. "Dear Shadow, I know you have been here all this time. I know you have been trying to tell me something, and I have refused to listen. But now I am ready. Speak to me." He set the pen down on the table and waited. A part of him felt ridiculous. What was he waiting for? Then, almost without thinking, he picked up the pen again and started writing. This time, as if the answer came from another part of his mind. "I have always been here, waiting for you to see me. I am not the enemy. I am the part of you that you rejected, the one you hid out of fear of others' judgment. I am your truth." Samuel shivered reading those words. He had spent his life trying to be good, avoiding conflict, swallowing his feelings to fit in. But in doing so, he had denied his authenticity. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city spreading before him. Until recently, everything felt oppressive to him. The routine, work, superficial relationships. But now he understood that the real problem was never the outside world, but the prison he himself had built in his mind. That's when he decided to do something he had never done before, consciously face his shadow. He sat down again, closed his eyes, and imagined himself in front of the figure from his dream. This time, instead of feeling fear, he observed it closely. It was himself, but without any masks. The figure spoke in his own voice. "You are more than you believe, but to discover it, you must stop lying to yourself." Samuel felt a pressure in his chest. He knew it was true. He opened his eyes and decided to take action. First, he took his phone and deleted all the messages he had written but never sent, those where he tried to justify his behavior to his ex-girlfriend and portray himself as the victim. He no longer needed to play the victim. Then he wrote a short message. "Now I understand what you meant. Thank you for opening my eyes," and sent it. He did not expect a reply, nor needed one, because this conversation wasn't with her, but with himself. Afterward, he took a blank sheet and wrote 3 questions that would change the course of his life. What do I truly want without fear of others' judgment? What part of me have I been repressing for so long? How can I live authentically from today onward? He looked at the questions, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. His shadow didn't disappear, but it was no longer an enemy. It was a constant presence he could now understand. That afternoon he went for a walk. The world hadn't changed, but something inside him had. Every person whose gaze he met was no longer a threat or obstacle, but a reflection of something deeper. He saw a man arguing on the phone and recognized his own suppressed anger. He saw a woman with her head down and felt his old insecurity. He saw a child playing carefree and longed to reclaim that freedom. In that moment, he understood what Jung meant when he said everything we see outside is a reflection of what we carry within. Samuel stopped in a park, closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he was not afraid to be who he really was. The shadow was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Now it was part of him. That meant he was ready for the next step. When he woke up, he felt different. For years, he had begun his mornings with a latent anxiety, an invisible weight dragging him into a meaningless routine. But this time, something had changed. He sat on his bed, looked at his hands, which seemed the same, but he knew he was no longer the same. He had looked his shadow in the eyes and, instead of fleeing, had accepted what? The day before, he had walked through the city with a clarity he had never experienced before. He realized that every person around him was a reflection of something inside. While pouring himself a cup of coffee, he asked, "How can I apply this in my life in a real way?" He knew the real test would come when facing situations that would previously have made him explode with anger or sink into sadness. His first test came soon. Checking his email, he saw a message from his former boss. For a moment, he felt the old impulse of anger and resentment, but then he took a deep breath and read carefully. The email said, "Samuel, we need you to come to the office. There's a problem with some files that only you can solve." There were no apologies or acknowledgement of the unfairness of his dismissal, only a cold request for help. Before, this would have filled him with rage and contempt, but now something inside him remained calm. He closed his eyes and asked himself, "Which part of me feels affected by this?" The answer was clear. His ego, which wanted recognition and revenge, but he was no longer a slave to his ego. He breathed deeply and wrote a simple reply, "I will come this afternoon." When he arrived at the office, his boss greeted him with the same coldness as always, handing him the files without looking at him. But Samuel did not feel belittled. Instead, he felt something curious, indifference. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood his boss's behavior wasn't personal. His boss was just a man trapped in his own fears and frustrations. In that moment, Samuel felt something he had never felt before: compassion. He finished his work without saying an unnecessary word, without expecting gratitude or recognition. He simply did what he had to do and left. As he stepped outside, he felt the fresh air on his face and realized something important. He was free. Free because he no longer needed validation from others. Free because his emotions were no longer controlled by external factors. Free because he had learned the greatest lesson of all: true peace comes from within. In the following days, he noticed more changes in himself. Situations that would have upset him before were now just small waves on the surface of a calm ocean. He received a message from his ex-girlfriend. Before, he would have felt a mix of pain and desire to recover the relationship, but now he just smiled. The message said, "I've thought a lot about what happened. Maybe someday we can talk." Samuel felt neither euphoria nor sadness, only peace. He replied sincerely, "When that day comes, I will be here. I hope you're well." He had nothing to prove, no need to cling to the past or force the future. One night, he dreamed again of the dark room, But this time, the figure that had watched him for so long was no longer separate from him. It was himself. In the dream, he smiled for the first time. Upon waking, he knew he had crossed the final door. He no longer feared his shadow, because now he was whole. Samuel's story is more than a tale of self-discovery. It reflects the process many of us go through when we dare to face our own shadow. Jung said no one is enlightened by fantasizing. Rather than illuminating with light, Jung taught the true awakening happens by becoming aware of the darkness within. This is exactly what Samuel experienced, an awakening to his inner truth. To understand Samuel's transformation process, we need to analyze each stage he went through and how they relate to Carl Jung's psychology. 1. The unconscious life. Before his crisis, before his world fell apart, Samuel lived in what we could call a state of psychological unconsciousness. He believed his identity was defined by his job, his relationship, and how others perceived him. This is a state many people find themselves in without realizing it. They live by external expectations, build identities based on how they want to be seen, and avoid any thoughts that might make them question themselves. But as Jung warned, what we deny inside inevitably manifests as destiny, and that's exactly what happened to Samuel. Life, in a brutal way, forced him to face the truth. His dismissal, breakup, and sense of emptiness were not random blows of fate, but signals that his unconscious was demanding to be heard. 2. The shadow, the internal enemy, that is not really an enemy. The shadow is one of the most important concepts in Jungian psychology. It represents all those parts of ourselves we have repressed, denied, or rejected. Samuel believed he was a good person, peaceful and rational. But as he began to analyze his emotional reactions, he realized there was anger, resentment, fear, and pride inside him. Something fascinating happens here. When we ignore our shadow, it takes control without us realizing it. That is why Samuel reacted with such anger to injustice and felt hurt when he didn't get the recognition he expected. Not because others had power over him, but because he was fighting something within himself. The first major change in his transformation came when he stopped seeing his shadow as a threat and began to listen to it. 3. Integration of the shadow. Acceptance and emotional responsibility. The most impactful part of Samuel's story is when he decides to face his shadow instead of running from it. Here lies a fundamental therapeutic principle. Healing doesn't happen by eliminating negative emotions, but by understanding them. Samuel performed a key exercise by writing down his fears and then saying them out loud in front of a mirror. This kind of exercise is incredibly powerful because it forces us to verbalize what we have repressed. In therapy, writing and mirror confrontation techniques are often used to help people accept their emotions. When Samuel looked at his reflection and said, "I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid I'm not enough," he was doing something extremely powerful. He stopped resisting his truth. Jung said that the shadow only stops dominating us when we make it conscious. Fear doesn't magically disappear, but when we recognize it and stop rejecting it, it loses its power over us. 4. The real test. Confrontation with the outside world. One of the most important moments in the story is when Samuel receives an email from his former boss. Here, we see the difference between someone still controlled by their shadow and someone who has learned to integrate it. If Samuel had responded with anger, he would have shown that he was still trapped in his ego. Ignoring the message out of pride would also have been a shadow reaction. Instead, he chose calmness. He didn't let his ego decide for him and simply replied in a neutral and objective way. This is a crucial point in any healing process. The real test isn't what we understand intellectually, but how we react to situations that once affected us. When Samuel faced his former boss without resentment or the need for recognition or revenge, he he showed that he was no longer controlled by his emotions. At that moment, he achieved something many never reach: emotional freedom. 5. Compassion. The final step in shadow integration and the most beautiful point in the story happens when Samuel, instead of feeling hatred or resentment, feels compassion. This is something Jung deeply understood. When we accept our own shadow, we stop projecting it onto others. Previously, Samuel saw his boss as an enemy who despised him, but after his transformation, he saw something else: a man trapped in his own world, his own fears. Understanding this is one of the most important keys to achieving inner peace. When we realize others are also struggling with their shadows, traumas, and insecurities, we stop taking things personally, and in that moment, we become free. Samuel's story shows us that true change does not happen through force or resistance, but through understanding. It teaches us that true peace of mind is not the absence of problems, but the ability to face them without fear. It reminds us that we cannot run from our shadow forever. Sooner or later, it will catch up. But if we have the courage to look it in the face and accept it, we will discover it was never truly our enemy. In the next part of this analysis, we will explore concrete techniques to apply these lessons in real life and achieve genuine personal transformation. 1. When someone triggers a strong emotional reaction in you, anger, envy, frustration, or the like, write down exactly what it is about that person that bothers you. Then ask yourself the key question: does this have anything to do with me? This exercise helps us see that often what we reject in others is actually a reflection of something we haven't accepted within ourselves. 2. The importance of accepting emotions without judgment. One of the biggest mistakes we make is trying to suppress our emotions. From a young age, we're taught that certain feelings are bad and should be avoided. But Jung taught us that every emotion has a purpose. Anger, fear, and sadness are not enemies. They are messages from our psyche. Samuel discovered this when he decided to write down his fears and say them out loud instead of avoiding them. To apply this in our own lives, whenever you feel a negative emotion, don't repress it. Ask yourself why you're feeling it and what part of you is being expressed. Write down your feelings without censorship. Seeing our emotions on paper helps us process them more objectively and prevents them from controlling us unconsciously. 3. Disidentify from the ego to find peace. The ego is the image we have of ourselves. But as we saw in Samuel's story, this image is often an illusion that limits us. The ego tells us, "I am a good, strong, intelligent person." But when life challenges us, we feel these labels are threatened. That is why when someone ignores, criticizes, or dismisses us, the ego reacts as if under attack. The secret to not being affected by the outside world is learning to disidentify from the ego. An effective exercise is to think about a recent situation where you felt offended and ask yourself, what part of my ego felt threatened? Imagine that part of your identity disappearing. Who are you without it? When we realize we are not our labels, we learn to let go of the emotions that control us. 4. How to face the world without unnecessary emotional reactions. The greatest test in Samuel's story happened when he confronted his former boss. Before his transformation, he would have reacted with anger or resentment. But after integrating his shadow, he viewed everything with neutrality. Learning not to react impulsively is one of the most important skills for achieving mental peace. To develop this skill, before responding to a difficult situation, pause and ask yourself, am I reacting from my ego or from my awareness? Observe the emotion without acting on impulse. This habit completely changes how we relate to the world and gives us control over our emotions instead of being controlled by them. 5. Compassion as a result of shadow integration. One of the deepest aspects of Samuel's journey was the moment he felt compassion instead of anger. Compassion is not weakness. It is the understanding that every person is fighting their own internal battle. When we integrate our shadow, we stop seeing others as enemies and begin to understand that they too are projecting their own wounds. To cultivate compassion in our lives, we can practice this. Whenever someone hurts you, try to see beyond their behavior. Ask yourself what wound or insecurity might be causing this in that person. Remember that what others do says more about them than about you. When we stop taking things personally, we become emotionally invulnerable. 6. The final transformation. Living authentically. Samuel's journey was not just about healing, it was about living authentically. Before, he tried to fit into others' expectations, but when he accepted his shadow, he no longer needed external validation. To live authentically, try this. Make a list of things you truly want to do, but avoid because of fear of judgment. Choose one and do it without fear. Repeat this until you no longer care about what others think. True freedom happens when we become who we really want to be without fear or guilt. So far, we have examined Samuel's story and his inner transformation through shadow integration. But the key is not only to understand this in theory, but to know how to apply it in daily life. Carl Jung left us powerful teachings that, when practiced, can transform how we live and perceive the world. Let's review the key points and how you can incorporate them into your everyday life. Identify your shadow by observing your emotional reactions. Every time something triggers a strong reaction, anger, resentment, frustration, pause and ask yourself, what part of me is showing up here? Keep a shadow journal. Write about moments when you feel you lost control of your emotions. Describe what happened, how you reacted, and what you think inside you caused that response. Practice the mirror exercise like Samuel did. Look yourself in the eyes and say aloud your fears, insecurities, and repressed emotions. Although uncomfortable at first, this exercise has great power to free you. Learn to pause before reacting. When someone criticizes, ignores, or provokes you, take a 5-second pause before responding. Ask yourself, am I reacting from ego or from awareness? Don't see others as enemies, but as mirrors. Next time someone irritates you, instead of blaming them, try to analyze which part of yourself is reflected in that person. Challenge limiting beliefs about yourself. If you've always identified as shy or impatient, question those labels. Ask, am I really like that, or is it just a story I've told myself? Allow yourself to experience difficult emotions. If you feel anxiety, sadness, or anger, permit yourself to feel without judgment. Observe and try to understand these emotions instead of suppressing them. Practice compassion. When someone acts negatively toward you, instead of reacting, ask yourself what wound that person might be carrying to behave that way. Remember, what isn't healed repeats. If you keep living through the same painful experiences over and over, it's because there is something inside you that has not yet become conscious. Make a list of the things you really want to do, but don't because of fear. Then pick one and do it without worrying about others' opinions. Don't cling to the need for recognition. Do things because you truly want to, not because you seek external validation. Use writing as a tool for self-awareness. Dedicate a few minutes each day to write what you feel and discover about yourself. Over time, you'll notice patterns and better understand your mind. Be patient with your process. Integrating the shadow is not an overnight event. It's a continuous journey of self-discovery. Remember, the power is within you. No one can make you feel inferior, insufficient, or unworthy unless you give them that power. Now let's reflect together. After everything we've explored in this video, what does it really mean for nothing or no one to affect you ever again? Many people believe that mental strength means being indifferent or feeling nothing. But that's not true. Jung never said we should ignore our emotions or become cold and unempathetic beings. The real secret is not avoiding what we feel, but understanding, processing, and releasing it. Ask yourself, how many times have you been hurt by something someone said or did? How often have you reacted with anger, only to later realize it wasn't worth it? How many times have you held on to resentment, waiting for someone else to change, without realizing that true transformation must happen within you? Jung said, "Until the unconscious becomes conscious, the subconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This means that as long as you don't understand your wounds, you will keep living the same story repeatedly. If today you decide to become aware, to look within and ask yourself, why does this affect me? Instead of blaming others, you will have taken a huge step toward your true liberation. Think about it. The external world only has power over you if you give it to them. If someone insults you, why does it hurt? Because part of you believes that insult. If you didn't believe it, you would simply ignore it. Why does it affect you? Because deep down there is a fear of not being enough. But when you truly know yourself, integrate your shadow, and accept everything you are without fear or shame, the words and actions of others lose control over you. That is true peace of mind. Finally, I want to ask you some questions. Please answer them in the comments to continue this reflection together. What is the greatest lesson you take from this video? What is your biggest fear when it comes to facing your shadow? If you could speak to your past self who didn't know any of this, what would you say? To close, I want you to write in the comments this phrase as a symbol of your commitment to transformation. My shadow is my ally, and the power is within me. Leave it in the comments. And if this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. See you in the next video.